What's going on, everybody? I hope everybody had a great weekend. I've got a super special, fun Monday episode today, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Now, the first thing I wanted to point out is somebody asked about the picture over my shoulder right here and what it was. So I'm going to go ahead and put an image of it on the screen so you can see it a little bit better. And then I'll tell you a little bit of the background behind it. I've been a teacher for, I think this is my 23rd year. And as during that time, I've had a lot of students that have over time come and gone, and I've gotten to know. And one of my students became a professional artist. And as he was starting out, he went to the Academy of Art for school. And as he was starting out and he was trying to get his feet under him, he was trying to pick up jobs to do some art stuff. And so I hired him, and I commissioned him to make a charcoal drawing of my two daughters for my 10th wedding anniversary for my wife. So my former student, Zach, he made that. And the only thing I gave him were a couple of pictures of Molly and Lucy. And I said, just do something fun, something creative and something fun, whimsical. That would be something cool. So that is the where that picture comes from. Now, the other thing I wanted to share is I got two super special, awesome packages in the mail this week, and I wanted to share them with you. The first one, I want to put an image up on your screen right now. And if you look closely, that is postmarked from Antarctica. John Eric, who I actually had the pleasure of meeting in person at a local show so he is in the Coast Guard, and he's been on tour a couple of times. And one of the times he was stationed nearby and went to a local card show, and we met. And then right now he has been on a tour where they went down to Antarctica. So he sent me a package from Antarctica, including this sticker, which is really, really cool, and this one. And then he knows that I'm a Cal Poly alum, as is my guy Ozzie Smith. So he sent me that cool card. And he knows I'm a Joe Montana guy, so he sent me that. And then he also sent me this awesome Bob Feller card honoring his service. So, John Eric, that was very, very special. Very special to think to get something to mail to me from Antarctica. So add another continent to the map. We've got Australia, we've got North America, and now we have Antarctica. Very, very cool. Now, I got another cool package from John, and John sent me, he collects some of the more modern pop-up cards autographed, which is very cool. And he found this one and sent it to me. So that is Greg Nettles in his last All-Star Game appearance toward the end of his career. He was about 40 years old there when he made the All-Star Game for the Padres, and you can see his autograph across there. So that is very, very cool, John. Thank you for thinking of me, and I very much appreciate it. Now, last week, you'll remember the question that was posed was, are we currently in the golden age, a golden era of card collecting? And that question was actually asked to me of my good friend Orlando of A Collector's Dream. And you guys had lots of responses, lots of great responses. Some people said yes, some people said no, some people said something in between. And so I was reading through them and I was like, it would be fun to kind of talk about these responses with Orlando. So I invited him on. Haven't had Orlando on in a little bit. He has been on the channel before, but I wanted to invite him on. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to read through your responses, and we're going to discuss them with Orlando of A Collector's Dream right here. All right. So, as I was just saying a minute ago, I have a very special guest, a good friend of mine, but you haven't been on the channel in a minute, Orlando. How's it going, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back on. It has been a long time, I
It
think,
has. It's weird how that works, but I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, man, I got some of my favorite people haven't been on, I don't think, in a little bit. So I was like, I got to get Orlando on. I got to get Theo on. And then I get to see you here in about a month.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Yeah, it's
Oh,
great
yeah.
because I was on your channel, pretty early on,
Yeah.
and then you had a whole bunch of, just became so big now.
Hey, you're over 3,000 subscribers yourself.
Yeah, I'm,
You're no small channel.
I'm just I'm just happy that I'm enjoying this hobby, and this YouTube community has just enhanced my entire collecting. So
Oh,
it's just awesome.
it's a total game changer.
Yeah.
It's so awesome. Well, you asked a question not that long ago, and I thought it was a great question, not just to hear what I thought, but to hear what other people thought. So last week, I kind of posed that question that you asked, which was, are we in like the golden age, the golden era of collecting cards? And there were a lot of responses. And, some people would say, oh, yeah, obviously, yes. And some people would say, oh, no, obviously not. There were a wide variety of responses. So we're going to take a look at some of those responses. But first, if you are not subscribed to Orlando's channel, there are 3,170 people who are. And I would highly recommend that you do. Orlando is very, very knowledgeable of cards. I honestly, Orlando, your collection is probably my favorite collection of anyone on YouTube. I
Oh, that's
love,
so kind. Thank
no,
you.
I'm serious. I love your Goodwin champions. I love how you have some awesome football cards, vintage football, like some of the best vintage football. You've got an amazing mantle, like one of the best mantles on earth. 52 mantle.
Yeah.
So you've got an amazing collection.
Very
And
diverse
so,
collection, I call it.
yeah. And that's what I mean, your if I were to like try to keep my collection on a trajectory, the goal would be to eventually have something like what you've got, because you have a really really amazing collection, and everything that you collect I like. Another thing you don't talk about a lot are some of your Perez Steels and stuff.
Yes.
You've got a lot of stuff.
I've got a lot of Hall of Fame autographs from Perez Steele and from Gary Thomas, which is the goal line art. I mean, I've got over 225 Hall of Fame football players' autographs. And I really never show a lot of that, but I probably
Yeah.
should. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's another one of my different diversions in this hobby. So,
Yeah.
you go down a rabbit hole and you kind of want to almost be a completionist if you can, as
Yeah.
someone who used to be a set builder.
Yeah.
But, and then as time goes on, you just kind of fine tune your collection, maybe get rid of some stuff or focus on some others. And it's been a long journey, and it's great
Yeah.
that I can share, the last few years on YouTube with everybody
Yeah.
else.
Oh yeah. Well, we're going to look at some responses of what some people responded to your question. And then I'm super interested in your opinion, because I don't know right now. I don't know your
Yeah.
opinion of that question, and I don't think you know mine. And we'll get into that. But first, I'm going to go ahead and play. I pre recorded me reading some of the responses. So let's go ahead and hear those here. Several people said, yes, we are in the golden age of card collecting. Let's hear some of those. This first one says, great video, Greg. This was so much fun to see everyone's grails. The early grails in the junk wax era are priceless, and the fact that many people went out and got them even after their value was considered worthless. As for your question, I guess there's a lot to take in on this. If you ask people who sell cards for a living, I'm sure that they would say, yes, we are in a golden era. Profits from selling sports cards is at an all time high. Certain cards are marketed for their exclusivity. What makes them exclusive is the price tag that comes with certain boxes that very few people can afford. I also think that we can say we are in a golden era because of the amount of people collecting. I used to think that the numbers were down because card collecting isn't as popular as it was with the youth demographic. But just look at shows. If there was a decrease in youth, it's more than been made up for by middle aged people and older. Looking at it through another lens, maybe we're not. With all the division between modern, ultra-modern, and vintage, too many times we have seen collectors not respecting the way other people collect. Where there used to be unity, there is division. Now, I'm not saying that these are fine lines and you are either on one side or the other, but we do seem to see a lot of strong opinions on collecting and in appreciativeness of what and how people collect. I still haven't answered the question. For me, I'm having the best time collecting that I've ever had. So it's a golden era for me. Way too long of a response. Thanks for the video. My friend Dan of Dan's Vintage Baseball PC says, to Orlando's question, we are absolutely in the golden age of collecting, particularly in the vintage world. We have been the equalizer of objective grading, even with all its flaws. We have instantaneous ways to determine card prices. We have more vintage cards in circulation than ever before. We have a myriad of ways to acquire them. We can make new hobby friends in an instant, visit card shows all over the country, and we can learn everything about particular card issues with just a click. Absolutely none of these options existed in the old days, and frankly, we're all infinitely better because of the advances in technology and the spread of information. Great question by Orlando, who I am absolutely looking forward to seeing again at Strongsville. And finally, my friend Brent of Brent Richards and Baseball Cards says, great stuff. As for the question from Orlando, I have thought a lot about this. For me personally, I could never replicate 1990 to 1993. I can't replicate that age, the sense of awe, and everything involved with my friends at the time, and just the innocence of life. The accessibility and the affordability of going to games and buying product was light years better than today. The nostalgia for that era in my teen years cannot be beat, and it cannot be replicated today. That being said, this is probably the golden age of collecting, if, for nothing else, the massive variety of things we can collect. There have been so many different cards and items produced by this point that it is almost endless what anybody can collect if they get into it now. The products are better, and community is better, and YouTube is a thing, and there are so many people to become friends with through this, as we are so much better connected through the online presence of the hobby now. The online hobby and proliferation of shows, etc., have made it way easier to learn about and to acquire all the vintage and pre-war items of the past as well. I cannot argue that this is the golden age of collecting in general. Having friends like yourself and being able to do what we do, and all of the smorgasbord of collecting items that we all have access to, makes this probably the best it's ever been in a universal sense. All right, we're back. What do you think about some of those responses, and do you think, Orlando, we're in the golden age of collecting?
Were some great responses from some great people there, and I have to agree with them. And Dan made probably some of the best points out there. We are definitely in the golden era. I mean, if you think about back in those days when I started collecting, well, again, that was back in 60s and 70s. We just collected through friends and traded cards through friends. There was really no monetary value to the cards back then, and there was no way to really, in many cases, complete a set if nobody in your neighborhood had cards.
Hmm.
And then you moved on to go into smaller card shows, and there it was just a different, totally different atmosphere. It was just kind of like a bunch of collectors getting together and just really mostly a lot of trading and stuff going on. But you didn't really get a chance to see a lot of rare stuff back then. And when you got into the junk wax era, that I think was kind of the first big golden era per se, where
Hmm.
we got so many new collectors in there, and that's when I kind of became a dealer around that era. And all of those collectors that came in during those early 80s, 87 with the Canseco's and stuff like that, like you, are now and some of these collectors, like even Brent,
Hmm.
started in the 90s. So
Hmm.
when you look at it, all of the things that have happened, I joined eBay in 99, and that was, we thought, was the biggest game changer ever. I
Yeah.
mean, you could literally find cards that you knew about, you read about in books, but you never saw at card shows. And no matter how many card shows I went to, there were cards I never saw,
Yeah.
you know. So we had the opportunity on eBay to really start with that route. And then after that, I mean, imagine what's happened now, that just at a click, you can virtually find that card anywhere. Uh,
Yeah.
all these auction houses that are out there now, people have more ways to get their stuff out. Just websites like Net54, you have so much to learn now, and you get to see so much that you never saw before.
Yeah.
So, but again, the junk wax era kind of screwed things up a little bit, because a lot of people got frustrated and left,
Yeah.
thinking that was going to be, put my son through college time. So after
Let
that,
me ask you,
yeah,
something. So
sure.
you just mentioned eBay was really a game changer, and I totally agree. I mean, eBay was really taking off when I was in high school, and when I was in college, I was buying cards through eBay. I went through a phase where I was doing a lot of golf cards, so a lot of the 81 Donruss and stuff, and I was in college getting, in the mail, my stuff in my college apartment of golf cards and Jack Nicklaus cards and stuff. My question is, do you think eBay would have been as much of a game changer if grading didn't come into play at the same time? Would people have been as willing to buy cards on eBay
Mhm.
if grading wasn't there, or did
Oh
grading
yeah.
really help make that a catalyst?
Well, I mean, grading always helped, but in the beginning, grading really didn't start till the early 90s. So it wasn't really that big a thing until kind of, I would say 2000 or somewhere after that, because most of the time when I bought cards on eBay in the beginning, they were raw, because most of the cards were raw. There
Hmm.
weren't that many graded cards at the time. I think what happened was the PSA registry really got people going, with that, and then people wanted to buy a graded card versus a non-graded card. But most of the collectors that had been in the hobby for a long time, we didn't even look at graded cards at the time. I bought all my stuff raw. Very
Hmm.
rarely did I buy anything graded, unless it was something that I didn't know much about, a rare, a pre-roll card that maybe I didn't know about. I would buy that graded. But all cards that I purchased during that time, all the way, I would say, up to maybe 2010 or so, they were all raw.
Hmm.
Other than that, I started buying the Goodwin Champions 1800 cards graded. But other than that, mostly raw. I mean, even all my Mantle cards were raw at the time. I bought them, almost every one of them, raw.
Hmm.
But things changed, and all of a sudden the hobby got this lull where not much happened after that junk wax era. And with this COVID, it just took the hobby to the next level. And even though some of the prices have gone down with whatever modern, the hobby is at the highest level that it's ever been. And if you go to card shows, the card shows are busier than they've ever been.
Hmm.
You know, people are more connected than they've been. I mean, with Instagram and Facebook, you know, you could never really buy things from one person to another very often, unless it was at a card show or something like that. Because you know, I would never know that. Let's say Mike Petty had a card that I wanted to buy, but
Hmm.
so now you just put it on Instagram, put it on
Yeah.
Facebook, and
Yeah.
boom, look at this guy buying a card from somebody in California that's super rare that I never knew. And so that's one of the aspects of this hobby that makes this, I think, the golden era. And if you look at the modern cards, I mean, come on, the innovation that has been created, it's just things that we never would have thought about. Yeah, there were refractors, and I remember in '93, Finest trying to get refractors. I opened boxes of that, and I was pissed one time because the refractor I pulled was the checklist. That sucked. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I
oh
pulled a
man.
couple of no names and then the checklist. But overall, you know, that was a good innovation, but nothing compared to what's happening now with the patch, with the autographs, with all these crazy cards and crazy things
Yeah.
that are happening. The debut patches and all that
Yeah.
stuff. So I think if you look at modern, the ways that modern can collect right now are crazy and vintage. I mean, there's so much vintage, and with everybody on YouTube or everybody just learning more and seeing more on eBay and auctions, you're seeing stuff that you never thought you could ever get because you couldn't find it. Now you could find it and buy it,
Yeah.
even though it's expensive. Now, one thing they said that I think, you know, and I hear a lot, well, back in the day, you could buy things a lot cheaper. But remember, everything is relevant. You
Yeah.
know, back in the day, everybody was talking about, boy, that 52 Mantle is expensive, you know, and it was like $2,000.
Yeah.
The Hannes Wagner, it was $50,000, and it was like, whoa, wow, that's ridiculous. Nobody will pay that kind of money. And
Yeah.
even the PSA 8, Gretzky bought it for $450,000, and everybody thought that was like, oh, that's ridiculous. So
Yeah.
it's all relevant. But if you look at the timeline, you know, that kind of vintage, most of that vintage eventually will go up in the long run, and we'll see what happens in the future.
I'm going to put Dan's comment back on the stage and take a look at it because Dan kind of lists some of the best things about why now is better than ever before. And he says, we have instantaneous ways to determine card prices. We have an equalizer of objective grading. He says we have more vintage cards in circulation. We
Mm-hmm.
have a myriad of ways to acquire them. We can make new hobby friends instantly. We can visit card shows all over the country. We can learn about a particular card issue with just a click. And none of this was available not that long ago. So, my question to you is out of all of those things that Dan mentioned, which one of those do you think is the most important, or is to you at least the reason that it's a golden era of collecting right now?
I gotta say, it's the technology. I think it's
Hmm.
the all of the online stuff, and I think that's pretty much one of the main things, the research and things that we can just click on there and just buy
Yeah.
or research and stuff. We didn't have anything like that, so I think the technology is probably the number one. Um, let's see, what else did he have on there?
Grading. He had
Oh, the
shows.
the pricing. I think the comp.
Yeah,
Back in the day, it was
VCP and stuff.
very hard to do comps, especially in some of the rarer stuff. And you have so many options now from VCP. You have 130 point. You have market movers. You have
Yeah.
all of eBay. Tons of really ways that you can take a look and see what is an actual price for something like this. Where back in the day, you didn't really know. It was mainly Beckett or the big standard catalog. And,
Mhm.
you could do eBay sales, but, some of the rarer cards you didn't sell on eBay as often. And now you could
Yeah,
go and look at the auction houses and check out
yeah,
all the auction houses and everything just at a click of a button.
yeah.
So I think
And
that's
and the
a big
fact that
thing.
you and I could be talking right now, and you're
Yeah.
currently sitting in Florida, and I'm sitting in California, and I've been fortunate enough to be in the same city as you twice in my life. Once in Strongsville and then once in Cleveland at the National. But we can still communicate all the time and text and send pictures and have
Mhm.
this conversation. I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy that we can have this conversation about this topic in this format.
You have the world on your on your hand, on your
Yeah.
phone,
Yeah.
the whole world right there, and that's something that who would have ever imagined? And imagine now with AI, you know, I mean, you could literally eventually just kind of do something where you could put your want list there, put it at a price that you're willing to pay, and maybe something will pop up and say, "Hey, that's the card you've been looking for for a long time." So
Yeah.
it, it's only the beginning. I think this world is so connected right now that it's just going to get better and better. And
Yeah.
we also have the opportunity now to almost talk to the uh, the card producers. I mean, Michael Rubin, you can literally almost not we can't talk to him directly, but he can get our feedback. Where think about Tops back in the 70s or 80s, you could never really talk to anybody, or they didn't want to hear from you. And even though they may not listen, at least there's opportunity now through social media for us to talk to these big companies like PSA and tell them, hey, we're not happy, or
Yeah.
talk to SGC and tell them, hey, we're happy. And those things were not available back in those days. So I think that even though whether we have the influence or not, I think we're able to get our word out. So the collector not only has more opportunities in buying, but we also have opportunities to kind of say our mind,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
uh, and I think all that stuff, is gonna help the hobby grow. And remember, also we have now breaking. We never had breaking in the past. I mean,
Hmm.
so certain people that want to collect certain things, you want to collect a certain players on a team, get into a break and for that team, and you get all the card, things like that. So
Hmm.
there's so many options, I think, for modern and vintage that it's to me that's why I think it's the golden era. Everybody can go in any direction that they want.
Yeah, my buddy Brent called it a smorgasbord in his comment. There's just a smorgasbord of awesome stuff that we can collect, and I mean, every year they're just adding more to the menu. Nothing ever goes off the menu. There's just more added to the menu, and it's pretty cool. All right, let's go ahead and hear from some people who said, no, we're not in a golden age. And I think there are two of those. So let's go ahead and hear from those guys.
Some people say, nope, we are not in the golden age of collecting cards. This first one says, I love Orlando, but the golden age of collecting is long gone. I'll admit the accessibility to cards is at an all-time high. Maybe that's great for pre-war collectors. I don't swim in those waters, so I'm not sure. When you say golden age, I think of something simpler. There is too much ick in today's hobby. The manufacturers are pumping out too much crap, just trying to make money. Grading is icky. 30 seconds spent grading a card and they keep it for months. People are obsessed with numbers. YouTube is drowning in ick. Just reference Mangini's video where he searched sports cards. The 50s and 60s are considered the golden age. I'm pretty sure it's not because every game was on TV. Maybe it's just get off my lawn, guys, in the 50s. There is too much ick for me to consider this a golden age. I still enjoy collecting, though. This second one says we are not in the golden age of collecting. The golden age of collecting was pre-COVID. You could jump on eBay and get so many steals and deals. You could buy cards for pennies on the dollar. We didn't have Pelican cases at shows We weren't on our phones comping cards. It was a hobby, not a business. It was a fun world to be in. We weren't breaking cards, we were buying boxes and opening packs. A friend of mine used to buy a case of Bowman every year and open it. I bought a case of 0304 Exquisite Basketball for $1,700. Now, product is unaffordable and 40% goes to breakers. Today looks nothing like the good old days before the damn panic. If anything, we are in one of the worst times of card collecting. But what choice do we have? We can't go back to the golden age of card collecting.
Now, I love a variety of opinions. Like, if we all had the same opinion, opinions wouldn't be that interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And both those guys had pretty strong opinions. I want to start with the first response. And he talked about how much ick there is in the hobby. And grading is icky, and the fact that there's ick from the manufacturers. Do you think there's a lot of ick in the hobby right now, Orlando?
You know, Greg, I think there's always been some ick in the hobby. I think the problem is now that the ick is much more visible and much more talked about than it was back then. Now, everybody and every time something bad happens in the hobby, you have tons of YouTubers, making it the big news of the day. And what gets the clicks? It's always the bad news, not the good news. So I'm more of a positive person. I look at the good stuff versus the bad stuff in the hobby. But the bad stuff, it's been happening before. There were trimming scandals in the past. There's a lot of bad guys that were in the hobby in the past. Look at all the way back to Mastro, Bill Mastro. Shill bidding and all that stuff. All that has happened, and there's always going to be, where there's money, there's always going to be some, not some ick. All
Yeah.
right, but overall, if you look at it, it's not as there's not much of a difference, that now versus back then. You still had that. You had some dealers that were not the best dealers, and when there was no grading, it was judgmental. You'd look at the card and the dealer would say, no, that's a 7. I'm no, that's a 4, or whatever, and you try to, you're just never going to agree. And I think that happens a lot in the hobby. Is breaking good, is breaking bad. Breaking, I think, is good and bad. So you really have to look at both things. There's good breakers, there's bad breakers, there's good dealers, bad dealers. It's just, I think that today we see the issues more, and the bad issues are more, prominent than the good stuff. So, but if you I look at the good stuff. I'm not going to concentrate on those bad things back then. And then I guess you look at the other comment was pre-COVID was the best time. Well, how about past COVID? Will this be the best time 10 years from now or 5 years from now? We don't know, but looking at long term, I do feel that 5 years from now we're going to look back and say, you know what? I probably should have gotten that Jackie Robinson 49 Leaf card 5 years ago, because now I can't buy it anymore. So you just never know for sure. But if you look at history, you'll see that there are ups and downs. And I think that pre-COVID was a good opportunity, but I think that this is even a better opportunity. And I think we're going to look back and say, God, man, right after COVID, when everything started dipping and stuff, things were the best. So, but you never know. We'll see what happens. I think we'll look at this video 5 years from now, and we'll see.
Yeah. I love that answer so much that you just gave. I mean, I hear you say a lot of stuff, and I watch a lot of your content, but I absolutely love what you just said. It's like there's always been ick, and I even wrote it down. There's always been ick, but the ick is much more visible than it was before. My dad for years, as a set builder of the 59 and 60 set, he used to walk around with a couple of cards in his pouch of
59 and 60 cards, because before he bought one, he would take the card out and he would measure it against it to make sure that it was full size, because trimming was so prevalent. You know, the most famous card, the most famous singular card in the hobby, the Gretzky, Wagner, was trimmed under oath, admittedly. And in fact, I don't know if you saw the Jeff Wilson interview with the
Yes.
Diamondbacks owner the other day, but he talked about, after that came out in that trial, that it was trimmed. I didn't know this, but PSA reached out to him and
Right.
said, "Hey, now we certified it. Now that it's come out that it's trimmed, we'll buy it back from you at the price that you paid,
Hmm.
and honor our guarantee." Which I thought that was really cool. I had no idea
Yeah.
that they did that. And he's like, "No, no, no, I still want it." And he's like, "Yeah, it's turned out that that's been a good decision, and a very good decision." But there's always been that stuff, and I think that's also part of the reason, you know, a lot of us didn't get cards graded is because there was such a lack of trust with autographs. And that was a big ick back then. Is it was like, unless you saw it get graded, because PSA didn't do authentication, there was no authenticator that we all could sit there and agree and say, yeah, they're pretty darn good. And so you couldn't get it really authenticated. So everybody just assumed that anytime there was an autograph on a card, it was fake. And now, one of the cool things is, a lot of these companies, Beckett and JSA and PSA, have gotten really good at authenticating. And so you can feel pretty confident, not 100%, but pretty confident. And what has that done? It's opened up a whole new world of getting cards autographed. So I'm with you. Um, and I'd also say one of the reasons that it's a great time to be a collector too is this. you know we used to be these individual silos, and there was a silo here, and then 10 miles down the road there was a silo, and there wasn't a lot of community, and you could go to a show and you'd kind of start to get to know people a little bit. But now, like, I remember walking into the lobby at the Strongsville Hotel and seeing you, and you going, "Hey, Greg," and coming over and giving me a hug. And I'm like, that's so crazy that we know each other and we literally live on the opposite side of the continent.
We
So I'm
knew
with
each
you.
other, but we had never seen each other in person. So it's
Yeah.
like crazy that, all these guys, the same thing when I met Mike Petty,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, I had talked to him for, gosh, almost a year before I met him finally. And
Yeah.
and yes, the YouTube, of course, is one of the things that is one of the biggest things I think in the hobby, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you look at all the stuff that we talk about negative wise with the hobby, it's always stuff that's similar to what happened before. Remember that, I don't know, you won't remember the 71 tops cards. People used to color
Yeah.
in the black borders, and there's
Yeah.
still tons of them out there with colored black borders.
Yeah.
And we never got cards autographed. I remember one time I was at a card show, and I had a K-Line rookie that was pretty beat up, but K-Line was there, and I went over to get him to autograph it. And this was before you had that. He kind of looked at me kind of strange because everybody was giving him pictures to autograph.
Yeah.
And I couldn't sell that card, Greg. Nobody wanted to buy it at that time. I sold that autographed K-Line rookie for $75
Mm.
because nobody, wasn't that time. And now people are crazy with autograph cards. So another avenue, something else that, you know, people can collect, people collect autograph sets completely,
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
crazy stuff like that, which, the options are endless. But the negative stuff, look, it's going to happen now. It's going to continue to happen. It's good to know what's going on. It's good to hear about some of the stuff and the burglaries and all that. But hey, there was burglaries back then. I was just on Hobby Hotline this morning talking to Dr. Beckett, and he was saying even back in those days when the first card shows that he would attend, there were some what he would call at that time petty theft because
Mm,
cars weren't worth that much. But there were some thefts back there. But you know, it just didn't get the exposure that it is today. But overall, you know, look at the entire hobby the way it is now compared to it was, you know, 20 years ago, even before COVID. It's just better than ever. And the card companies now are coming up with such new stuff like the debut patches and things like that. That you know, it's just to me, it is the golden era. You know.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you, and again, I think that you make great points. It's I can't believe how much fun I have talking with you, Orlando. There are a couple of times I'm sitting there watching you, looking, and then out of the corner of my eye, I look over at myself and I see myself listening to you, and I'm just sitting there smiling because I enjoy hearing from you so much. Let's hear this last little group. I think there's three responses. A couple of people that we both know, what they had to say.
Some people said, well, maybe, but it's kind of complicated. My friend Tony, Southern Collector 14, says, I have not been back in the hobby long enough to answer from a historical standpoint, so I can't tell you if this is the best time to be in the hobby. What I can tell you is, this is my time to be in the hobby, so I will make it my best time. I think this sort of question is all about perspective. Thanks for asking such a thought provoking question. My dad says, I think the best era for collecting has more to do with your financial position than a specific time period. If you can't afford to buy anything that you want, then now wouldn't seem so special. But if you reached the age where you can put a little money aside to buy cards you think are cool, then it's a great era for collecting. And this last one says, great video, Greg. Funny how perspective changes based on accessibility. As for this week's question, is this the golden age of collecting? This is such a hard question to answer. Personally, I think that can really only be answered by each individual because we all do look at things differently. If you have a memory of being a kid and being able to go to the local card shop and having the same chance at a new set and the best cards as the businessman standing next to you, it could be now where you can get a card that is a one of one that no one else in the world has. The 70s and 80s were an age of innocence in the hobby. Value was placed differently on cards back then. How you collected was as well. Set building gave a sense of accomplishment. In the 90s and early 2000s, the insert started cards just seemed to get cooler. In the last 20 years or so, modern collecting has become more like buying lottery tickets. Completing a player run for modern players is essentially impossible, and set building is basically a thing of the past. If you are collecting vintage, things are a little easier to find now, but the thrill of the chase is also a bit diminished. I think the late 80s and early 90s was probably the golden age, in my opinion, because the variety of options for new stuff was there, but not overwhelming. Price guides helped identify older stuff, and building relationships locally helped maintain the hobby. There are different good things about the hobby now, in that it is easier to reach out to other collectors, build new friendships, and be exposed to new sets and information than it may have been before.
All right. So I thought those were some interesting ones, and they didn't really mean yes or no, but they brought up some points. And my dad's comment said something that I thought was interesting, which is the best time to collect for an individual is when that individual has a little bit more financial resources to participate because of their financial resources. And Tony, you know, we're both friends with Tony, and he's talked openly about, his daughters, his kids. He has a son too, but his daughter stopped playing softball. He's trying to look to kind of fill a void of time, and he's at a point in his life where
he's able to have more resources to acquire and make new friends and stuff. And I totally agree with all of that. But I also think that you're a great example because you've talked about your past, and you were not an overly wealthy person. You were out there just kind of grinding, doing card shows and collecting and picking up things and piecing some things together. But now you've got some absolutely massive cards. So if you're not a person who is has a lot of financial resources at the moment, and they have the hopes of growing into a bigger collection, something that you've done, what advice do you give to that person of, hey, just keep doing this and you'll get there? Or like, what do you say to somebody who sees these collectors like yourself, but they can't just go out and start buying big cards?
Well, I mean, I think Tony made a great comment that collect kind of what you want to collect. Make it your best time. Set yourself a goal, of course. But one of the things that you also talked about is that things are more expensive now than they were back then. But that's also an opportunity for somebody that's been collecting for a while, which many of us have been collecting for a long time by ourselves. So we do have some collections that we bought maybe 20 years ago, some cards that are now worth a lot more than they were worth back then. So this gives someone like me an opportunity to, without having that extra income, I'm on Social Security, a way to redo my collection by selling some of the cards that I had in the past, maybe some of the higher grade cards, and buy some other cards that I really want. So those are the type of things that I couldn't do before I was on YouTube, or before I was on social media, or before I did any of that. It was real difficult because the only other way would be to go to a show or put something on eBay, you know, and you're dealing with a lot of cost and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of options that we have. I think today, and I'm kind of going off track a little bit here, but I just you know you don't have to buy such expensive cards. I mean, there's, like I said, so many options, out there, and you could start vintage and just collect stuff that has good eye appeal, mid-grade stuff, and it's very affordable right now. It really is. So I don't know, kind of if
Well,
that
let me
answered the
let me
question,
ask you.
but
Yeah, let me ask you a follow up. So,
yeah,
like a couple of the things that you have in your collection, and I'll use some specific examples. But I'm guessing you bought them when they were far less expensive than they are now. Like your Goodwin Champions cards. Some of your high grade Goodwin Champion cards are worth crazy money now. Crazy money. And I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing you didn't pay anywhere near those
no,
amounts. And your Mayo, your anonymous football card, like that's such a rare card and that's such an expensive card. And again, I don't know what you paid for it, but you acquired it at a time where now that would be really, really difficult to acquire.
mhm.
Um, so you seem to me as a I'd like to consider myself a younger guy. I'm 45. I you seem to me like a person who kind of was able to identify some really cool things, but also affordable things at that time that had a lot of potential in them. What was like your strategy with that? Like, I know everyone says collect what you like, but I mean, you were picking up cards that were very affordable that right now are just completely not affordable. Did
Yeah.
you just kind of luck into that, or did you see why isn't that worth more? And then you kind of went down that direction. Like, take me through that process.
Well, a lot of it was just I really was fascinated with the history of cards overall. And, reading the Beckett and reading the standard catalog just wasn't enough for me. I mean, I'd go back and just really wanted to learn more about the history of cards. I was in the printing business, so I love that aspect of the cards. The different years, and back how they were printed back in the 19th century. So I kind of fell in love with stuff like that. You know, and what happened to me was just at a card show, somebody came with a few of those Goodwin Champion cards and ended up buying them. And nobody really knew much about it at that card show, and I didn't know much about them either. And it was just one of those things that I collect what I liked. I fell in love with them, and I thought at the time, I was a set builder. I said, it's a 50 card set, just like your pirate set. It should be pretty easy to put this thing together. 50 cards is nothing. I put together a 1972 set, and that was a tough one. So I figured it'd be easy, but it was super difficult. I couldn't find any cards back then. And then, I'd be on eBay, and every time I'd see one, I just bought them. At that time they were pretty cheap, $50, for the regular guys, and even the expensive guys. I remember I bought my first Cap Anson. It was a one, and it had some paper loss, but it cost me $750. And I thought, man, that's a lot of money. And I actually had to sell a couple of things to get it. And, now a Cap Anson and a one is worth, I don't know how much, but it's at least a $5,000 card.
Yeah.
And, it's just those type of things. I got into that set because I just loved the history of it, how they were printed and stuff like that. But I think if anybody, anybody can find something like that. Look, you never know what those Pirates cards are going to cost, Greg, in the future. And you have some real high grade cards, because once you get to 5 and 4 and 5s in those sets, they're high grade.
Yeah.
And people just didn't know about that. The same as some other cards that I collected some of the Leaf premiums. The 49 Leaf cards were super expensive, but the Leaf premiums, nobody knew about them, and they didn't even know. There was no comps on stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I still think that there's a lot of things that are undervalued in pre-war. And, if you look at certain things, you do your homework, and you'll find certain things that you'll just fall in love with, that other people are going to fall in love with, years from now. And look back and say, damn, I wish I would have bought some of those Goodwin Champions back in those days.
And those Goodwin Champion cards are just so beautiful. And you obviously have the number one set in the world, literally. I mean, they're just amazing. I got one last question for you, and then I want to throw out my question to the audience for next week. My last question to you is, one of the things that was mentioned in that last comment is that the accessibility to cards has kind of taken away a little bit of the thrill of the chase. Do you think that the thrill of the chase has been diminished? And do you think that's maybe why some people have gotten more into pre-war and more into oddball? Because I'm sorry, you hate the term oddball, so I should have said that with you. That those types of smaller release sets, is that why people have gotten into those, because those still have a thrill to the chase of it?
I think that the chase is, there's different types of chases. And I think the chase now is finding the right card at the right price, because there is more availability now. So if you wanted to buy let's say a Gaudi Ruth, it was tough to find some of them back then, especially at shows and even on eBay. But I think now you can find them everywhere. It's just a matter of finding the right one for the right price. So I think the chase is kind of, can I find that centered one that I can afford, that has that eye appeal, that's right for me?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of more the new chase. Yeah, there still are rare cards out there that you can still chase, but I think people have become more knowledgeable and more picky as far as what they put in their collection. So it's not just necessarily let's find, it's easier to find a rare card. Yes, it is, but it now. Not only do I want that rare card, but I want that rare card in this condition because
Yeah.
I'm able to find that now. Where in the past you kind of jumped on it if you found it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I love that answer. And basically what that does is that answer allows everyone to have a chase. It doesn't have to be ultra rare to be a chase. Your chase can just be finding a really nice undergraded copy for a really affordable price. The deals are out there.
Yeah.
So just keep hunting and you'll find some deals. I think that's a great answer. My question for everybody out there for next week is, other than the two most commonly used pieces of advice in the hobby, in my opinion, of buy the card, not the grade, and collect what you like. I hear that a lot. Buy the card, not the grade, and collect what you like. My question to the community of Midlife Nation, tell me, what advice, other than those, would you give to your fellow collectors in the hobby? What piece of advice besides buy the card, not the grade, and collect what you like? That is my question for next week. Orlando, I'm honored that you took the time to come on with me. I can't wait to give you a hug in about 4 weeks in Strongsville, and maybe we'll grab another Chick-fil-A lunch together.
Yeah.
And it's always a blast hanging out with you, and I've been smiling for the last hour. So thank you. You have anything else you want to say?
No, it's been great, and I definitely can't wait to see you at Strongsville. I owe you a big, big hug.
I can't wait. Sounds great. All right, guys, let me know your thoughts to that question for next week. And thanks again, Orlando.